You are sitting in a room full of people, and someone mentions a tragedy, a death, a disaster, something that should stop the conversation cold. But it does not stop the conversation. They acknowledge it. They nod. They make the appropriate face for 2 seconds. And then they move on. They order another drink. They change the subject. They laugh at something unrelated. And you are still sitting there. Your stomach is in knots. Your chest is tight. Your nervous system is vibrating with the unspoken grief of the room. The grief that everyone else appears to have discarded like a receipt they no longer need. You are the only person who is still feeling it. And you are beginning to wonder, as you have wondered 1,000 times before, whether something is fundamentally wrong with you. Carl Jung identified this not as mere empathy, not as sensitivity in the colloquial sense. He called it an innate sensitiveness. He called it a permanent feature of the psyche that causes certain people to receive what he called a deep impression from an event that would leave a less sensitive person cold. But this deep impression is not just emotionally exhausting. It is the opening to a far more dangerous psychological process. The same perceptual apparatus that absorbs every unspoken tension in a room also loses the ability to distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to everyone else. And the numbness you eventually adopt to survive that confusion is not a shield. It is the trap that is quietly dismantling your psyche from the inside. You have spent your entire life apologizing for a body that is absorbing the exact realities everyone else is desperately trying to ignore. Someone makes a passing comment at dinner, a small remark, slightly barbed, slightly dismissive, wrapped in enough humor that everyone else lets it go. But you cannot let it go. The remark enters your system like a splinter, and for the next 3 days, you are turning it over, analyzing the tone, the micro-expression that accompanied it, the almost imperceptible shift in the speaker's body language that told you the joke was not quite a joke. People around you say the same thing they have always said. You are overthinking. You are reading into it. You take things too seriously, and you try every time to believe them. You try to brush it off, to laugh it away, to tell yourself that you are manufacturing significance where none exists. But the impression does not lift. It sits in your chest like a stone, and the weight of that stone has nothing to do with the size of the event that placed it there. Jung understood this with a precision that modern self-help has never matched. In Volume 4 of the collected works, Freud and Psychoanalysis, he identified what he called innate sensitiveness as the ultimate and deepest root of a particular kind of psychological suffering. He was not using the word casually. He meant it as a clinical fact. Certain people are born with a nervous system that processes reality at a fundamentally different depth than the people around them. Clinical research has since confirmed what Jung observed in his patients a century ago. Studies on sensory processing sensitivity have shown that roughly 20% of the population carries a biological trait that causes them to process larger amounts of sensory information than usual. They take in more data from every interaction, more tone, more subtext, more nonverbal information, more of the emotional weather that fills a room, but that most people filter out automatically. And the cost of processing more is that they exhaust faster. Not from weakness. Their system is running at a higher resolution than it was designed to sustain comfortably. This is the part that nobody tells you. Your exhaustion after a simple conversation is not a psychological flaw. It is the neurological cost of translating information that everyone else was built to ignore. You are not fragile. You are processing a data load that was not meant for one person to carry alone. And the people who tell you to stop overthinking are not being cruel. They are unable to perceive what you are perceiving. The slightly tense conversation that leaves you needing a nap did not register in their system at all. They were not ignoring the tension. They were genuinely unable to detect it, so they assume it does not exist. And from that assumption, they conclude that you invented it. You invented nothing. You were the only receiver in the room tuned to a frequency that everyone else had already turned off. But there is a terrifying reason why you absorb these impressions so deeply. It has to do with how your mind relates to the collective, and Jung had a name for it that most people have never heard. When your perceptual channels are permanently open, what follows is a complete collapse of the boundary between you and the outside world. You walk into an office building on a Monday morning. Nothing has happened yet. Nobody has spoken to you, but within 30 seconds, you know. You know the meeting did not go well. You know someone on the second floor is furious and trying to hide it. You know the receptionist smiled at you, but her jaw was clenched, and the clenching told you more than her words did. And before you have reached your desk, you are already adjusting. You are already recalibrating your voice, your posture, your facial expression to accommodate the invisible storm that nobody else seems to have noticed. You soften your tone. You ask fewer questions. You make yourself smaller, not because anyone asked you to, but because the atmospheric weight of other people's suppressed emotions is pressing against your chest, and the only way to relieve that pressure is to become whoever the room needs you to be. Jung had a precise term for this experience. He called it participation mystique. It is a concept he borrowed from the anthropologist Lucien Lévy-Bruhl, and it describes something far more radical than empathy. In C.G. Jung speaking, drawn from his lectures and interviews, he described a layer of the unconscious mind where man is no longer a distinct individual, where the boundary between self and other dissolves and the individual psyche widens out into something shared, something collective. You do not merely sense the other person's pain. You become partially identical with it. This is clinical, not metaphorical. Jung treated it as observable fact. He observed that children, for instance, have no psychology of their own in the literal sense. They are so much in the mental atmosphere of the parents, so much in participation mystique with them, that they absorb and express whatever the parents have repressed. And the adult, who never developed firm psychological boundaries, operates in a disturbingly similar way. You are not graciously helping others by feeling what they feel. You are being psychologically infected. You are absorbing their repressed shadows, their unacknowledged rage, their buried grief, and you are acting it out in your own body as if it were yours. That sudden, heavy dread that drops into your stomach when someone angry enters the room, that is infection, not intuition. Your body cannot distinguish between their psychological weather and your own. The anger you feel is real, but it never belonged to you. And since you cannot tell where they end and you begin, you spend hours, sometimes days, trying to metabolize an emotion that was never yours to carry. This is the mechanism behind the exhaustion that sensitive people describe after social gatherings, family events, or even a trip to the grocery store. You are not just peopled out. You have been absorbing the unconscious material of every person you encountered, and your psyche is now trying to digest emotional content it never generated, will never understand, and has no way of resolving. The resolution belongs to someone else, and there is a secondary wound that rarely gets named. You feel what others are carrying, so you often become the person who tries to fix it. Not because anyone asked you to. Your body will not let you rest until the emotional disturbance in the room has been resolved. You become the mediator, the peacemaker, the one who smooths things over, the one who asks, "Are you okay?" when everyone else is pretending everything is fine. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. And people come to depend on this. They come to expect it. They begin to treat your absorption as a service, and your exhaustion as an acceptable cost, and your needs as something that can always wait, since you are the one who is supposed to hold everything together. You become the container for other people's emotions while having no container for your own. And eventually, the weight of what you have been holding, none of which belongs to you, becomes indistinguishable from the weight of your own unlived life. And this constant infection forces you to make a devastating choice. When the sheer volume of this shared misery becomes too much for one human frame to hold, the mind initiates a drastic defense mechanism, and this is where the real danger begins. To survive the onslaught, you shut down. It happens in stages, not all at once. First, you learn to control your face during conversations that would normally break you open. Then you learn to speak in a measured, even tone when everything inside you is screaming. Then you learn to offer calm, logical responses when someone comes to you with high drama. Once you discover that logic is the only register that won't cost you 3 days of recovery. And somewhere along the way, without noticing the exact moment it happened, you stop feeling the thing you were trying to contain. People notice. They call you cold, detached, aloof. They tell you that you used to be warmer, that you used to care more, that something has changed. And you walk away from those conversations, feeling like a defective human being, because you could not manufacture a warm reaction to save your life. The warmth has not disappeared. You can still sense it somewhere far below, but it is buried beneath so many layers of protective numbness that you can no longer reach it on command. Jung mapped this phenomenon with devastating accuracy in Volume 6 of the collected works, Psychological Types. He was describing the introverted feeling type, a person whose emotional life is so vast and so intensive that it cannot find adequate expression in the external world. And what he wrote should stop you where you stand. An intensive sympathy, being shut off from every means of expression, acquires a passionate depth that comprises a whole world of misery and simply gets benumbed. Read that again. A passionate depth that comprises a whole world of misery simply gets benumbed. That word, benumbed, is doing work that an entire library of self-help books has failed to do. It is telling you that your numbness is not apathy. It is not a failure of caring. It is the direct consequence of caring so much, so deeply, so intensely, that your system could not sustain the voltage and shut itself down. You appear cold to the outside world precisely because you are drowning in empathy on the inside. And the people who accuse you of not caring are looking at the frozen surface and concluding that there is no water underneath. They see the ice, and they call it stone. They see the stillness, and they call it emptiness. They have no way of knowing, and you have no way of explaining, that beneath the composure is a furnace so hot that the only way to survive it was to seal it off completely. This is the quiet grief of being wholly misunderstood. You never chose to shut down. You shut down because the alternative was annihilation by the very empathy that everyone now accuses you of lacking. And the accusation itself becomes another wound that the numbness must absorb, another piece of evidence that you are failing at the one thing that used to come naturally, which was to feel. But what happens when you maintain this numbness for too long is the part Jung warned about most. Artificial freezing does not preserve the thing it contains. It changes it, and the longer it persists, the more it aligns you with something far larger and far sicker than your own private suffering. This artificial freezing of your emotional core eventually aligns you with the sickest aspect of modern society. You finally achieve the calm, logical exterior that everyone demanded. You no longer overreact. You no longer cry when you walk into a tense room. You no longer feel the need to fix everyone's invisible pain because you can no longer detect it. You have successfully numbed the part of yourself that was causing all the problems. And for the first time in your life, people approve of you. They tell you that you seem so much healthier, so much more balanced, so much more reasonable. The compliments come in, and they taste like ash, but you accept them, because this is apparently what a functioning adult is supposed to feel like, or rather, not feel like. And then, quietly, so quietly that you almost miss it, you realize that joy has gone silent, that desire has gone silent, that the pull of meaning which used to drag you out of bed every morning and into the strange, beautiful, painful world has stopped pulling. You are functional, you are productive, you are calm, and you are completely hollow. Jung saw this coming a century ago. In C.G. Jung speaking, he issued one of his most lacerating warnings about the direction modern civilization was heading. He described what he called cultural cripples, people produced by the dominance of one-sided cerebral thinking. The psychoanalyst, he said, who approaches these people not merely as medical specimens but as human beings, should be able to bring them closer to nature, make them more natural, as nature wanted them to be, and as they faced life thousands of years ago. And if the gifts we are endowed with break down before the tasks of life, if they wither away or run riot, we have only our flight from nature to blame. A flight, he said, that leads to suppressed naturalness and to oppressive over-civilization of the psyche. Oppressive over-civilization of the psyche. That is the clinical description of what happened to you when you learned to stop feeling. You never healed. You civilized yourself past the point of being alive. In Volume 16, The Practice of Psychotherapy, Jung delivered the consequence with brutal economy. A person who builds their entire life on a single function, who suppresses the others in service of the one the world rewards, may wake up one day to find that they have missed half their life. Half your life. Not a bad afternoon, not a wasted year. Half. And you already know which half he meant. Not the productive half. Not the half where you showed up on time, performed well, earned the approval, kept the peace. He meant the half that contained the painting you never started, the relationship you never pursued after convincing yourself that your intensity would ruin it, the grief you never fully entered, since by the time you were ready to feel it, you had forgotten how to cry. He meant the half that was alive, and the cruelest part is that the numbness you thought was healing was actually your surrender. You let a culture that is itself profoundly neurotic convince you that your greatest capacity was a disease. The culture said, feel less. The culture said, think more. The culture said, the person who does not react is stronger than the person who cannot help reacting. And you believed it, since believing it was the only way to stop the pain. But you never stopped the pain. You stopped feeling it. And underneath the anesthesia, the wound kept spreading, and the life kept passing, and the joy kept calling, and you could not hear it anymore, having sealed off the exact faculty that was designed to detect it. You stopped limping, but you also stopped walking. But this total detachment from your own life is the exact crisis required to force a true awakening. Because here is what the outline of this entire journey reveals when you stand far enough back to see it whole. The danger was never that you felt too much. The danger was the moment you learned to stop feeling. Individuation, the process Jung spent his life mapping, is not about learning to be numb so that you can fit into a neurotic society. It is not about building thicker walls, or better masks, or more convincing performances of emotional composure. It is about realizing that your intense feeling function, the very thing that has exhausted you, isolated you, and made you the person who cannot move on when everyone else already has, is the only bridge back to meaning. Every section of this video has traced a single arc. You were born with a nervous system that processes more than most. That openness made you vulnerable to the unconscious merge. That absorption became unbearable, so you froze. And the freezing aligned you with a culture that rewards emotional death and calls it maturity. But the freezing was never a destination, it was a crisis. And crises, in Jung's framework, are invitations, not punishment, not failure. Invitations to descend into the material you have been avoiding and retrieve the parts of yourself you buried in order to survive. You thought your sensitivity was a curse you had to manage. It was always the evidence of your psychological depth, demanding to be integrated rather than amputated. The exhaustion was not weakness. It was the cost of a perceptive capacity that the world is not organized to support. The numbness was not strength. It was the moment the cost became too high and the system shut down to protect itself. And the work now, the real work, is not to go back to feeling everything without boundaries. That path leads to the same collapse it always did. The work is to feel everything with consciousness, to hold the impression without being swallowed by it, to enter a room and sense the emotional weather without mistaking it for your own, to carry your passionate depth, not as a wound that must be hidden, but as a faculty that must be trained. Jung did not pity the sensitive person. He saw them as carrying a capacity that most people have lost, a capacity for depth, for perception, for the kind of feeling that does not skim the surface of life, but plunges directly into its center. The world does not need you to be numb. The world is already numb. The world is already overrun with what Jung called cultural cripples. People who have traded their instinctual aliveness for the appearance of control. What the world needs, and what you were built for, is a different kind of strength. The strength of the person who feels everything and remains. Not the person who refuses to flinch because they have lost the ability to feel. The person who feels the full weight of the room and chooses deliberately to stay present inside it. That is not sensitivity. That is integration. And integration does not look the way you were taught to imagine it. It does not look like calm. It does not look like balance. It does not look like the person who has it all figured out. It looks like the person who walks into a room full of unspoken pain, feels every ounce of it, and does not abandon themselves in the process. It looks like grief that moves through you cleanly because you let it in without becoming it. It looks like anger that you can hold in your hands without throwing it. It looks like love that is not desperate, no longer trying to merge with the other person in order to feel whole. The frozen lake does not need to stay frozen, but neither does it need to become a flood. It needs to thaw, slowly, with the warmth of consciousness, with the patience of someone who has finally stopped running from the depth they were born to carry. And that is the only thing Jung ever offered as a cure. If you recognized yourself in what you just heard, you are not alone in that recognition. And there is more to understand about how Jung mapped the path forward from here. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.